Hello, I'm happy for another opportunity to study with you today in the book of Revelation. We're up to chapter 18. In chapter 18, you have the fall of Babylon the Great. The great harlot is going to be judged. Or, as interpreted from what we've understood from earlier chapters and from the context in which the book is written, we're talking about God's judgment on the city of Rome, on the worldly nature of Rome, its seductive qualities of Rome that are represented by this figure of the harlot, the great city that has seduced the world and the nations to go along with their policies and their persecution of Christians. And they do it for all of the luxuries and money and trade, power that are represented by a relationship with Rome. It's very much like the language in this chapter. Again, almost every verse in the book of Revelation is an allusion to some passage in the Old Testament or some prophecy in the Old Testament about the destruction of different nations and cities that you can read about in Isaiah or Jeremiah or Ezekiel or Daniel or some of the minor prophets. Many, many parallels. And it's using judgment, apocalyptic language that you find in the Old Testament prophets to describe the fall of Rome. You can read particularly Isaiah 13, 19 through 22, Jeremiah 50 and 51, chapter 52 and verse 11, all talking about the fall of the ancient Babylon. Now this new world power, Babylon, the Roman Empire that Christians are having to deal with, is going to be judged. Well, we saw that we're speaking about the fall of Babylon in chapter 17 and verse 16. We talked about the horns were the different subject kings or provinces ruled by puppet kings that made up the Roman Empire. The beast was the civil power of Rome, and these are through God's providence going to one day be turned against the city of Rome, and the city of Rome will fall through internal decay, through moral corruption, external invasion, natural disasters. All of these things contribute to the fall of the Roman world. The destruction of the empire comes from within. It was a nation that was pictured in the Old Testament as having feet of iron and clay mixed together. And when God's kingdom strikes those feet, the kingdom is going to be destroyed. It doesn't hear together in the seed of men. It's made up of many different nationalities of people. And we were told that God, of course, is in control over the nations of men. Jesus is Lord of Lords and King of Kings. And if we stay faithful to him, we'll come out victorious in the end over any persecuting enemy or power that may arise. The cause of Christ will go forward. We know in the Old Testament the Assyrians thought that they were in charge, but actually they were just a stick in God's hand to punish Israel and Judah. And they went out to destroy other nations, but they didn't realize they were serving God and that God was using them as his instrument. Christ is King of Kings, Lord of Lords, and he's going to bring about the fall of Babylon the Great. There's an announcement of her destruction that's given in 18 verses 1 through 8. After these things, I saw another angel coming down from heaven, having a great authority, and the earth was illuminated with his glory. What a glorious angel, shining in brilliant glory and light coming down. And he is a great angel, like some of the other angels that we've seen sent down out of heaven to carry out the purpose of God. And he has all of the authority of God behind him as he comes down. So the fall of Rome is pictured in the language used to describe the fall of ancient Babylon. An angel heralds that fall in verses 1 through 3 of chapter 18. He is preaching and letting the saints know and all the world know that would read this book that kingdom is coming down. He has the right and power to act in delivering this message because he's sent by God. He's a glorious servant from heaven. He has qualities that show he is a heavenly creature come from the presence of God. And he's going to announce this sentence against Babylon. The work has been begun in heaven, and once it's been decided upon at God's judgment seat, then it's surely going to come to pass. So the saints and all of us are assured again that despite the way things look outwardly at times, God is on his throne, God is ruling, and God is the one that ultimately decides the fate of nations and men, and that we need to worship him. If we would believe that God is in charge and that he is ruling, it would give us great peace in our hearts. And Christ wants us to have that kind of peace. It would guard our hearts against many worries and fears if we recognize that behind all things there's one mightier than all and mightier than the one who is in the world, our Lord Jesus Christ and God the Father. Verse 2, and he cried out with a mighty voice, saying, Fallen, fallen is Babylon the Great, and she has become a dwelling place of demons, and a prison of every unclean spirit, and a prison of every unclean and hateful bird. So the fall of Babylon has been talked about, the fall of Rome, several times throughout this book. It's repeated over and over again that it's going to fall. We saw it talked about back in chapter 14. We had that headline announced, talked about in chapter 17. Now we have it again here in chapter 18 by drawing it out, marking it in our minds, causes us to long for this event to take place, and it's surely going to happen. It's going to be accomplished. And when you've anticipated something very greatly and longed for it, then when it's finally accomplished, the satisfaction is all the greater. You relish it all the more. And the book of Revelation is setting us up for the fall of this great enemy. So this message should be absorbed and remembered that the angel brings. There's mighty voice with which he speaks. He has great solemnity. He has great importance in his message, and a messenger speaking with such a voice ought to be heard. The city would become an abode of foul and gruesome demons. It would become a place of unclean and hateful birds. It's pictured as this dark picture of a graveyard city where all of these unclean things dwell, because ancient Rome is going to be no more a place of habitation for men, but it's going to be a place that goes down to Hades in judgment. So what a gloomy, eerie picture that's there of the fall of Rome and what it's going to be turned into. A city with no more light, no more cleanness, no more goodness. It's the very opposite of what is pictured of the holy city, the New Jerusalem that the saints are going to dwell in someday when all is said and done. Oh, it's a glorious city. A city with pearly gates, a city with streets of gold, a city with many precious stones, a city where God is dwelling and all the righteous live. Ancient Rome is coming down, and it's going to be the very opposite of that. It's going to fall and never live again. Yeah, there's been other cities called Rome built on top of those ancient ruins and around the ancient ruins, but that Roman Empire city ceased to exist. It was conquered and sacked over and over again by the barbarians, and it shrank from being a city of millions, of 1 million people in the Empire days, down to 20,000 people in the Middle Ages and Dark Ages. Nothing like the ancient city of Rome. That ancient imperial city is never going to rise again to be what it was in the days of John and these Christians that were being persecuted. So we're given, again, this is describing the fall of Rome, not in literal language, but in symbolic pictures to get an emotional response as you see this city and this empire and this enemy come to an end. In verse 3, for all the nations have drunk the wine of the passion of her immorality, and the kings of the earth have committed acts of immorality with her, and the merchants of the earth have become rich by the wealth of her sensuality. So this kingdom has, had all of the nations seduced by this spiritual harlot, the great city of Babylon. She's formed alliances. That's the type of fornication that was talked about in the Old Testament with Israel and Judah, when they would make these foreign alliances and depend upon them rather than worshiping God and putting Him first. Well, this harlot has many lovers that she's seduced. All of the nations and merchants and kings of the Mediterranean world have all been seduced by her idolatry, by her politics, by her military power, by all of the wealth that she can bring to them through these alliances. So power, prestige, and control is the picture that is given. And the merchants of the world are going to capitalize on her wantonness and fornication, and they're going to ally with her even in persecution of Christians. But it's all going to come to ruin in the end, because they're allying themselves with an enemy of God's people. In verse 4, the appeal to the people of God. And I heard another voice from heaven saying, "Come out of her, my people, that you may not participate in her sins, and that you may not receive of her plagues. For her sins have piled up as high as heaven, and God has remembered her iniquities. Her sin has reached to heaven, and God has taken notice of her." Now, this is what needs to be recognized, that every Christian should spiritually come out of the world, come out of Rome, and be separate. Like the Hebrew Christians were told that they didn't have in Jerusalem a lasting city, but they needed to come out of that city. They needed to come outside the gates, like Jesus was crucified outside the gate, because that city wasn't going to last. Well, the same thing here is said about Rome. Spiritually, we need not to compromise with the worldliness of these world cities, but we need to disassociate with them spiritually, not follow their immoral ways, have no fellowship with their sins. Stay spiritually separated from the world is the call that God gives to Christians. Friendship with the world is hostility to God. It's a spiritual adultery. So all the saints, don't compromise. Come out of the world. If you fellowship with her sins, you'll receive the plagues and have fellowship with the plagues as well. Isn't that the warning that's given at the very end of the book? That we shouldn't add to the book lest we have these plagues added to us. We shouldn't take away from the book lest our part of the holy city and the tree of life is taken away from us. Don't spiritually compromise your principles and your faith. God's works on principles. And just as He judged Old Testament cities for their sin and their persecution of His people, He's also going to judge the empire of Rome and the city of Rome. God is not changing in His nature. He is immutable. He's the same yesterday, today, and forever. And the same kind of unrighteousness and sensuality and persecution and false religion that brought these ancient empires down, going to bring Rome down. The same principles we can learn are going to bring down nations. Even to this day, God still operates the same. So we can read about punishments of Old Testament cities like Babylon in Jeremiah 50 and 51, and we can see that they still apply. The Lord looks down and sees unrighteousness of a nation, and He's going to bring about its judgment here in time. Her sins and arrogance deserve punishment, just like the ancient harlot cities of Nineveh and Babylon, Jerusalem, when they became arrogant, Tyre. So this city is going to receive her just reward. Pay her back even as she has paid, and give back to her double according to her deeds. In the cup which she has mix twice as much for her. So she's going to receive very severe punishment, like the proportion of her sins. When it talks about giving her double, you think about the picture of a scale. Here are all of her sins that she's committed. Then God's going to add wrath and punishment on the other side that doubles the scale. So she gets the punishment that equals her crime. She reaps what she sows, and she is going to face judgment that is equal to her sins when you double the scale. Her judgments are going to be according to her arrogance, to the degree that she glorified herself and lived sensuously. To the same degree give her torment, mourning. For she says in her heart, I sit as a queen, and I am not a widow, and I will never see mourning. For this reason, in one day her plagues will come, pestilence and mourning and famine, and she will be burned up with fire, for the Lord God who judges her is strong. So just like the ancient city of Tyre boasted in the book of Isaiah in chapter 47 and in Zephaniah chapter 2, God is going to deal with this boastful great city, the new Babylon the Great, the city of Rome, because of all of the things that she boasts about. God exalts the humble and he brings down the proud. And when a nation thinks that they can't fall and that they'll never see judgment, they're never going to suffer the fate of nations that went before them, it's always the same. This kind of arrogance comes before their fall. So in one day, very quickly, the plagues of God will come upon the city. Famine and mourning and death are going to visit her, and she's going to be utterly destroyed. Pride and haughtiness go before destruction. And you can hear from the boast of this harlot city that it's going to come down suddenly and completely. And this judgment is going to fall from God, who has great strength and power, unlimited power. And he's going to burn it up with divine fire. And it's going to be a city that's coming to an end. Again, this isn't a literal way that Rome fell, but it is a picture of God's total destruction. Just like he burned up Sodom and Gomorrah, he's going to bring an end to the Roman Empire and to the city of Rome just the same. And verse 9, and the kings of the earth who committed acts of immorality and lived sensuously with her will weep and lament over her when they see the smoke of her burning, standing at a distance because of the fear of her torment, saying, Woe, woe, the great city Babylon, the strong city, for in 1 hour your judgment has come. So her judgment's going to come again because of her arrogance that she has. And all of the kings of the earth are going to see the judgment of that great city. Her allies who entered into spiritual fornication and alliances with her to do evil and to persecute Christians, they're all going to stand back at a distance and see her destruction, and they're going to weep and wail over her because of the loss to themselves that's going to come. They are many that are going to survive the destruction of the Roman Empire and live on after it, but they're going to see and lament their loss of all of that Roman power and trade and money that they were able to receive. Indeed, the world's going to fall into a period of the Dark Ages as far as trade and income and all of those things are concerned. So they're crying. They've lost their meal ticket. Babylon was the leading market of the world, made all of that trade possible, and now it's gone. And you notice it's not Jerusalem that's being talked about. That doesn't fit this picture. It's not Judaism. It's not Catholicism that's being pictured. It's not the churches of the Reformation, if you're looking at it from a Roman Catholic point of view. We're talking about a worldly merchant city that's coming to an end, a commercial power. And that was what Rome was in the days that the book of Revelation was written. And remember the context of the book. These things must shortly come to pass that John is writing about. He says at the beginning of the book and the end of the book that he's talking about. The vast majority of this book has to do with things that the early Christians were going to face and see. In verse 11, the merchants, along with the kings of the earth, are going to lament. It says, and the merchants of the earth weep and mourn over her because no one buys their cargo anymore. Where are they going to take all of these luxury goods and the things that they used to take to Rome for all of the senators and Caesars and people of power there in the city would use? So they mourn because they don't have a market anymore for their merchandise. They entered into evil and they created great businesses, but now they're going to suffer loss because of the fall of Rome, the great harlot. Economically, she has fallen. If you're going to be morally bad, in the end, you're going to be find yourself off bad economically in the end because of God's curse. The articles she traded in are enumerated in verses 18, 12 through 13. Verse 12, cargoes of gold and silver and precious stone and pearls and fine linen and purple and silk and scarlet and every kind of citron wood and every article of ivory and every article made from very costly wood and bronze and iron and marble and cinnamon and spice and incense and perfume and frankincense and wine and oil, olive oil and fine flour and wheat and cattle and sheep and cargo of horses and chariots and slaves and human lives. All of these luxuries were shipped to Rome. Oh, what kind of money all of those tradesmen used to make. But now they're mourning because those things have been cut off. There is no more city of Rome when God's judgment comes. So luxuries of life are what the Romans trafficked in. Oh, they had their fine metals, all of the precious stones. They had purple and scarlet that the royalty wore. They had silk that was shipped all the way from China over the trade routes and came to the city of Rome, and that they were dressed in, and that we read in different historians about just how decadent these Romans became, how wealthy they were. The citron wood is an Aramaic and a beautiful wood that came from Africa. They had ivory. Of course, we know from elephant's tusk that they could make the ivory from. They had cinnamon that was also shipped over the trade routes from the east, from China. They had different spices that came from India. So just think of the luxury-loving, perfume-loving, gold and silver cups and all of those things that the Romans had at their banquets and parties, and all of the rich food that they were able to enjoy. All of the horses and chariots that their cavalry and their chariots would use, and their senators and people of wealth would ride upon. And now all of that has been cut off. Along with all of these other types of shipments that came to Rome, they had markets, slave markets of human souls that were sold as property. 60 million slaves in the Roman Empire. I heard some politicians say that slavery was invented in America. It's a ridiculous thing to say. The Roman Empire, they had slaves from every different race and nationality of people that were serving there. Very depraved society, that all of that evil trade is going to be wiped out. And the fruit you long for has gone from you. All things that were luxuries and splendid have passed away from you, and men will no longer find them. So they'd use worldliness and lust to make all of these alliances with foreign nations and set up their trade, and it's no longer this trade going to be fulfilled. The word for fruit that's used here is only here in the New Testament. It has for ripe or juicy fruit that you would eat late in the summer, that the wealthy would be able to eat, that was a perfect degree of ripeness that they would enjoy at their banquets and feasts. But all of those luxuries now are gone. They've perished forever from the Roman world. And along with that, the empire and that city. They stand at a distance, these merchants, and they mourn over the end of the great wealth that they were able to enjoy. Verse 15, the merchants merchants of these things who became rich from her will stand at a distance because of the fear of her torment, weeping and mourning, saying, Woe, woe, the great city! She who was clothed in fine linen and purple and scarlet, and adorned with gold and precious stones and pearls, for in 1 hour such great wealth has been laid waste. So now this great harlot, who was so popular, who made everybody else in the Roman world rich, through all of these immoral alliances, and through the effort to spread that Caesar worship to bind everybody together, oh, so there was money in the bank to have a relationship with the city of Rome. But now these merchants who profited through this spiritual fornication, now these merchants have seen all of their interest in gain taken away. They stand afar off, helpless to intervene. They don't want to be caught up in the destruction of the city. They can only stand at a distance and weep of all of their profits being taken away. Here the great city Babylon, the city of Rome, was impregnable and indestructible and enduring forever, they thought. But now the great city that was clothed in such splendor and wealth has been brought to an end. So they lament that their markets are gone. In 1 hour, just a sudden collapse, their business has gone away. In the perspective of eternity, in God's point of view, these empires and cities just last for an hour. They don't last at all. We're just in our human life, we're just a breath, we're just a vapor that vanishes away in a moment. We're just grass that rises up in the morning and is gone in the evening. Just in an hour, this great city and great market and all of that is passing away. In the last part of verse 17 through 19, we see all of the people that are working on the sea that lament over their trade coming to an end. And every shipmaster and every passenger and sailor, and as many as make their living by the sea, stood at a distance and were crying out as they saw the smoke of her burning, saying, What city is like the great city? Those who carry their wares and stand far off and weep over such destruction of the city. And they threw dust on their head, and were crying out, weeping and mourning, saying, Woe, woe, the great city, in which all who had ships at sea became rich by her wealth, for in 1 hour she has been laid waste. So the shipmasters, that's the pilots and the helmsmen, along with the passengers on board the ships and the sailors and everybody who worked in a nautical life to make a living and to trade, all of them stand at a distance in this apocalyptic picture, weeping and crying as they see the smoke of the city arising up into the sky. Her sins had cried out to heaven like the sins of Sodom, like the blood of righteous Abel called to heaven for judgment. So now the smoke of destruction and God's wrath is pictured rising up into heaven as this city has now seen her day of judgment. Just like the city of Tyre, again, these pictures, it's an echo of many, many passages in the Old Testament where ancient cities and harlot cities were punished. This is all happens. Again, God's working on the same principles in dealing with empires and nations and persecutors. He is the same. The symbols of grief and lamentation are seen with them taking ashes and throwing them on their head and mourning. But notice that their grief is really not that there's no more city of Rome or no more Roman Empire. The grief isn't about the punishment on the Romans. The grief is about their own loss, that they're not going to be able to have the trade that they used to have with the city. Their paycheck is gone. The effect on the righteous. Well, how do the saints look upon these judgment when it comes? Rejoice over her, O heaven, and you saints and apostles and prophets, because God has pronounced judgment for you against her. You remember those souls under the altar back in chapter 6 that were pictured, the waiting for God to send judgment to avenge their blood? Well, now the angels call out and say, rejoice, because the judgment has come. Her judgment is a cause of rejoicing for all of the righteous dead, for all of the righteous saints that live on earth, because she is now defeated. Now she's received the just judgment that she deserves for shedding the blood of the saints and the apostles and the prophets of the church. The tables have now turned, and it's time to rejoice. This persecutor is being removed from the scene. We're not going to have to deal with this world persecutor anymore. The worldly rejoiced. You remember when the two witnesses back in chapter 11 were put to death, but then God raised them up. The gospel, that gospel message that came through the apostles. Oh yeah, they killed the apostles. They killed the prophets. But God resurrected their cause, and it goes on. But this worldly persecutor now goes down, and it's time for the saints to rejoice. It's come to pass that their words have been fulfilled. That's something to rejoice in too. They foretold that this judgment would come, and certainly it has, and their blood has been avenged. We left vengeance to God, and God has repaid. So the church is at rest from this persecution, and the harlot has earned the death sentence that she received. In verse 21, we see about the nature of her fall. And a strong angel took up a stone like a great millstone and threw it into the sea, saying, "Thus will Babylon, the great city, be thrown down with violence and will not be found any longer." So here's the angel, the great angel. Some have called it the angel of the consummation of judgment here. Takes something like a great millstone and throws it down into the sea to picture the fall of this city. Symbolizes the fall of Babylon the Great. Well, we had the same kind of picture in the Old Testament with Sariah, the servant and helper of Jeremiah, that took the scroll from Jeremiah and tied a string tied to a rock and was to throw it in the Euphrates River, and so was Babylon going to fall. And here it's a great millstone that's thrown into the sea. This is not a millstone like an individual would use, but like a city would have to grind their grain. Some of these millstones, we're told in the International Standard Bible Encyclopedia, said are as much as 5 meters in diameter. This great millstone thrown into the sea to show how the city's going to fall. So again, repetition is used to describe the fall of the city, and the saints need the assurance that's given here, the emphasis that's placed on this, that this is surely going to come to pass, and it'll give them peace. It'll give them confidence to stay faithful if they know what's coming for this persecuting city of Rome. Rome will fall and sink like a great stone, and they'll never rise again to bother the Christians. In verses 22 and 23, at least the first part of 23, all of the amusements and business and home life of the city are going to cease. And the sound of the harpist and the musicians and the flute players and the trumpeters will not be heard in you any longer, and no craftsman or any craft will be found in you any longer. And the sound of a mill will not be heard in you any longer, and the light of a lamp will not shine in you any longer, and the voice of the bridegroom and the bride will not be heard in you any longer. So silence is going to be there where there was once bustling activity. Musical instruments and symbols of joy and gladness and revelry that were filling the city of Rome in the past, those things are going to be brought to an end. There's not going to be heard anymore in that ancient capital any craftsmen hawking their wares. No more business activity. It's all vanished. There's not going to be the voice of the mill grinding. You have to have the mills grinding the grain to feed the multitudes of the ancient city of Rome. But those mills aren't going to be grinding anymore once the city is sacked and that ancient capital is removed from power. And the light of the lamp isn't going to be seen there anymore in any of those homes. We're told about all of the great illuminations that went on. In Nero's garden, he illuminated it with the burning of Christians when he persecuted them. But there's not going to be the light of the lamp seen any longer. There's not going to be any of the rejoicing that you have in the different home activities and the celebrations of marriage and marriage feasts. Those things are going to be seen no more. Then in verse 23b and 24, we have the reason for the fall. says, because all of the nations were deceived by your sorceries, and in her was found the blood of prophets and of saints, and of all who have been slain on the earth. So the merchants and the kings, in their lust and avarice, they had fallen for the deceptions of the harlot, had been seduced into having relationship with her. All of these other countries helping support Rome. But Rome is coming to an end, because in Rome blood is found, innocent blood that she shed. It's been said about the Roman Empire that there were 160 million people's blood was shed in different Roman wars that they fought in order to expand their kingdom and control it. But worse than that, worse than all of that blood shed to promote her wealth and gain her ends, is the deliberate murder of Christians, the deliberate persecution of apostles and prophets because they worshiped Jesus Christ and God the Father instead of worshiping the Caesar. And they had killed and slain them in the arenas. They had fed them to the lions. They'd killed them in various forms of torturous death because they would not worship the beast, the government of Rome. And as a result of persecuting the body of Christ and his saints, they're going to die, and they deserve to die. So this kingdom, this nation, is going to come to an end. Well, another tremendous picture about the fall of this great persecuting power and how it's going to be carried out. And we can look back in history and see that God indeed brought that Roman Empire to an end with its capital city. And all of that organization and trade was done away with, and it was all done because they persecuted Christians. It should give us encouragement that God lives, that he's active, and that we should stay faithful to our Lord Jesus Christ, who's King of Kings and Lord of Lords. I hope this lesson will bless you. I hope that it will encourage you to be faithful to the Lord and come out of the world and serve Christ.